God puts us in nations, in places, not by mistake, but to do a job. What if we opened our eyes to the needs of our colleagues, of our leaders, of our subordinates, and we were a priest on their behalf? Welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. My name is Brett Johnson.
And I'm Lynn Johnson.
And we're going to be talking about how to get our business into God's business. Our subtext is Let My Business Go, and we'll have guests from around the world. So thank you for joining us this week and every week on the Repurposing Business Podcast. So welcome to the Repurposing Business Podcast. It's a delight to have Christine Garde-Denning with me today, all the way from California. How are you, Christine?
I am great. Thank you.
Great. It's good to see you again. And I was just reflecting today, it's been about 10 years since we met you, actually.
Wow. Time goes by so fast. That's true. That's true.
Yeah, it was back in Long Beach. We were both speaking at a conference down there. And I remember Lynn coming back from the women's restroom saying, I just had this amazing conversation with this amazing woman, and I've invited her to come to our executive intensive. And so she's coming up to our place shortly. And that was quite a while ago.
It was amazing. I feel like that retreat was pivotal. There was something amazing that you two were doing and are doing. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's unpack your story a bit and we'll get to the executive intensive. So when we met you, you'd actually started off a nonprofit out of New York at that time. And so tell us a bit about your background and what prompted you to start CouldYou. And people can go to CouldYou. It's like a question without the question mark.org. And they can go and find you there. But what got you going? What was some of the drivers, the passions that got you going, Christine?
So I had been, prior to starting CouldYou, I had been doing work in gang diversion. And so I had been working I started out at the border of Tijuana and San Diego. I worked for HUD. And I started a gang diversion program for gang members and their families, and then at-risk students. I was working with 100 gang members and families. And in the course of those years, it was incredible. It was the hardest thing I ever did. I think it literally, it shaped who I am. I went from working with gang members at the border to then moving to New York City. And then I started, I did a few different programs, 2 different programs. I started working with just low-income students in neighborhoods like Spanish Harlem and first immigrants who had not been able to speak English. They had just been here for less than a month. And I was working with high school students. And then eventually I ran a program for college students. And it was a faith-based program through InterVarsity where we gave students a glimpse into kind of the brokenness of the systems. We had them live in, at the time, what was considered the worst neighborhood in America, in the South Bronx. Lived there, and they partnered by working with local nonprofits and got to really get invested in how they can be a part of Shalom and seeing some beautiful things happen. And I loved it. I loved seeing the transformation. But a college student who gets the light bulb turned on, it's then a little bit difficult for that college student to then move into action because they're still in college. Their parents are typically paying for their university. And so I had this desire to do something similar with adults who wanted to think through purpose and passion, make a difference in the world, who just didn't know how. And so I wanted to see a similar thing happen where we could activate people into leaving a legacy, doing good. And that's where I was reaching out to a bunch of people, potential donors. But unfortunately, at the time, every donor really wanted you to come alongside whatever they cared about. And at the time, I really wanted to just let people explore what they care about. So then eventually a gentleman out of New York City had a hedge fund, and he had put a lot of money in America and in Africa for charity. he felt like his money in America had been a good return on investment, but he had lost a lot of everything. And, in his investments in Africa and charity, a lot of them didn't work because he didn't have the right people. So he funded CouldYou. And it was birthed with this idea that the initial birthing was the Frederick Buechner quote for me that says, true self happens when your deepest gladness and the world's deep need meet, and that we would help people of influence from the West walk alongside people of influence from Africa and live in the middle of that intersection, make the world a better place. And that's how we started CouldYou, this idea that can one person change the world? And so that was our roots, and we officially started in Mozambique.
Yeah, fantastic. So that's great. So as I understand it, when you took people to think about, okay, what do you have in your hands? What are your competencies? What have you been blessed with? What are your capabilities, your skills? And you wanted to give them some exposure to what's happening in other parts of the world. You would pack them on a plane and take them off to Mozambique then. And these weren't all Christians that you were taking over. These were just people, right?
Right. It was not a Christian program. And so that's one of the things that we had decided early on. I really want to see systemic change. And as I felt like, for me, I wanted to work with government, and I wanted to work with everyone, right? So governments, churches. I also wanted to work with all faith communities. And I felt like our greatest success could potentially be if we were just meeting needs and let the church do what the church does. And we felt like we wanted to just begin to build bridges and meet particular needs. And that's where our first relationships in Africa was with the Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellows. And so it's an extraordinary group of people under the age of 35 that are vetted. The Archbishop did not need another legacy, but he felt like the men and women that got those nations out of colonization were the right ones, but it was not the right men and women to take them out of poverty. So this idea that a younger generation could leapfrog some of these ideas around in every category. And so what we would do is bring people from the West who had a particular interest. And maybe it was entrepreneurship, or it could be music, it could be entertainment, it could be business, it could be health. But we would gather a small group of those groups of people, and we'd then find some of the best people inside the Tutu network. And they would journey with us for the week, and they would be the voice for Africa, leading the conversation. Because normally the West shows up in Africa with these great ideas and all this money, and they try to implement ideas, and they don't ask for input from the people on the ground. So we decided to switch that and allow the Tutu Fellows to tell us, hey, here's what we think should happen. And Americans can come alongside, or people from Europe can come alongside. And so it built long-lasting friendship between them. To this day, some people have become forever friends. People have done charity together. People have done business together. And I think it was what gave us at least a foundation to have relationships where they trusted each other.
Yeah. So back to that quote, you're saying to people primarily from the West, for example, from North America, okay, so what are you passionate about? And then go to the real world, see what a real need is, and how do these things intersect without being prescriptive.
Right.
See what happens.
Absolutely. And here's the beauty of it. People, if you genuinely want to make a difference in the world, the reason you often don't is you don't know how to, or you're afraid of being taken advantage of. So when you put someone who has a heart to change the world, to do something good, we watch them be so creative. I remember, taking a businessman who he had no idea what he could do, but by the end of his experience and then some self-reflection and coming home, it literally made him realize that he could take a percentage of his business earnings each year, and he could allow his employees to donate to certain organizations that they cared about as a way to ignite them. So it would start to change people's business practices, the way they spent their time. So I felt like we didn't have to be prescriptive, because I trust that people who want to do good, they'll find such creative ways to do it.
Yeah. Now, one of the groups you took across from years back, you told me about, was a group of rappers, weren't they, or musicians? What was that story?
So we had it was a singer-songwriter who, actually it's Jared Cotter. And so Jared is a singer, and he's a songwriter, and he and Jay Sean had written this like #1 song, and he came to Mozambique, and here we were in Mozambique walking through a community in a peri-urban neighborhood called Mafalala. And Mafalala has incredible history, where presidents were born, and some insane, beautiful things of culture have come out of that particular community in Mafalala. But it is very poor. And we literally were walking through where we were meeting some people, and you couldn't have crafted this any better. But we all of a sudden, Jared heard, coming from somewhere in one of these, homes or, whatever, the song playing in Mozambique. And it was such a moment of music changes everything. Music levels the playing field. And I remember him calling Jay Sean. And if I don't even know if he got through or not, but I do know that there was a moment of like, they're listening, like, here this is. So we would go into different communities, and other musicians and him would jam. There was this real sense that he would encourage younger artists. And so it was beautiful, because I think what happened is it allowed him to walk along some artists. It also allowed him, he has been a generous donor to us. He has offered just his influence to share our story through some other avenues. And so I think what it does is it ignites something that gets you connected to maybe a part of the world that you otherwise would not have been connected to.
Was he surprised at the influence that he was happening in the middle of nowhere in Africa?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not like, I didn't expect them to. When we were bringing him, I genuinely thought, oh, they won't know who he is.
Yeah.
I figured they won't know. And that wasn't true. They very much knew. They very much knew the song. I have a bad memory right now, or I'd say it, because it's a song we all knew at the time. Anyway, it reminded me though that the world is small, and we are so connected, and we want to care for our families. We want our kids to have a good education. We want our families to be safe. We want to enjoy life and have music and food and health. And I think it's the same in every country. Yeah.
And going back to your original intention, the way you positioned CouldYou, do you think we shoot ourselves in the foot as people of faith by trying to link everything to a statistic of a conversion or a soul saved or something you can put on a Christian scorecard?
I have a particular bias. I do. I believe I have been turned down by Christian funders who wouldn't partner with me because they said we did not save souls, we didn't proselytize. And yet what I tried to share with them was the work that we're doing is people, God wants them to be living a life that is healthy, that is safe. And when people are dying of preventable diseases, that's not okay. And so for me, I can't be all things. And so for me, I feel like let the church be the church. But you know what? Before you even get someone into a church, make sure that they have the basic needs, which is health and food and safety. And so I felt like it was all part of the same mission. And so I do think that people will shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, certainly. I think hopefully there's a broader awareness that's growing, but I think traditionally that has been the metric, and it's really a reflection of our own dichotomy where we separate the spiritual and the not so spiritual, the spiritual and the practical, and we call the practical stuff the social gospel or the watered down gospel. We're really, as I think Ed Silvosa pointed out, good news to the poor is you've got a job,
Right.
and
Right.
and good news to somebody who has a health crisis is that they've got health care, or
That's right.
somebody who's uneducated, that they have access to education or clean water or electricity or internet, whatever.
It's all important. It's all, that's where I have this real sense that every one of us, we all can't do everything. So why can't each one of us be respected for the one thing we do? And so if you do your one thing well, then let me do my one thing well. And I think together, each of us collectively, we do change the world. It's just that when some of us think our one thing is the only thing and the only focus, then suddenly we feel like we're not working together.
Yeah. And as Paul says, if the whole body says I'm a hand or I'm an eye, or he talks to us about this, but when it comes down to organizations doing a redemptive work, we become siloed again. Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. So right now you've ended up focusing on 3 big initiatives in CouldYou, and so
2 now. We're 2.
Yes. So tell us the 2 initiatives, and we'll end up with the women's health one last. But let's go to others. Yeah.
So when we started CouldYou, early days, before we even stepped foot in Africa, as a board, we believed that our mission was to curate, prove, and scale solutions to poverty.
Yeah.
In partnership with governments, NGOs, individuals, businesses. Now, at the time, we had no idea how that would happen, but we felt like that was our mission, right? And then we spent years where we laid a foundation of relationships, which some people who would start a nonprofit would think, well, that's a lot of wasted years. But for me, relationships really matter. And if you don't have the right people to partner with, no matter how much money you have, I think you could do damage. Right. So I think it was not wasted years. I think what happened is for a period of time, we just built trusted relationships across the continent. Then we found our first initiative to try to prove and then scale. And it started out with literacy. So at the time, Mozambique had a 70% illiteracy issue. They were graduating high school seniors where UNICEF at some point, I believe it was UNICEF, had even put out a paper saying they were functionally illiterate, which really, you can't be functionally illiterate. So we looked at illiteracy. We ended up partnering with some amazing teachers and educators on the ground, Mozambicans, and they had created their own curriculum that was working in communities that had no books, that had a chalkboard, and a rural community, and students truly with no supplies. They had created this curriculum that was working. So we got alongside them, got some PhDs, and were able to formalize it. This curriculum is brilliant, and it was able to get students literate in 5 months.
Wow.
So we started to then, in partnership with the Ministry of Ed, train teachers. And we were training teachers the curriculum, and it was working. And a few things happened. One thing is that we believed the number 60 was as high as you could go to train teachers at a time. The government really had a great need to train all the teachers. And so they took the program from us and they began to implement it themselves in partnership, except that they were bringing hundreds, sometimes 600 at a time. And so it kind of doesn't really work when you go that high. And so we went a little bit back and forth. We still believed in that program. We felt like this is where we landed. Literacy is going to be our thing, and this is going to be what we do to scale. We're going to prove it and scale it. So we proved it. We were in the starting phases to scale it, and it was brought to our attention that 94% of the girls in Mozambique were starting kindergarten, and only 11% were ending up in 6th and 7th grade, 1% to college. You can't build a nation without girls. So it became really important for us to say, well, literacy then is not going to be the solution. Let's first get girls in school. Like, it's a step behind it, right? Yeah. And we reached out to people who knew better than we did. And eventually it was period poverty was brought to my attention.
Right.
And so we ended up focusing on that because we now know it is a global issue. It's in every country, and we know it's solvable.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, then literacy.
We just pause on that over there because, so period poverty. So basically the girls, they get to a particular age, they start going through a menstrual cycle, and it's the time of the month, and they can't go to school because they don't have the right health care and so forth. And so then they end up bit by bit just falling behind and dropping out. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it's definitely a multifaceted problem. I'll give you an example. Just in May of this year, an article came out, and it was a research study funded by Plan International in a region in Ghana that we work in. It stated that 83% of the girls in that region are having transactional sex for a pad. So that same region 3 years ago, UNFPA did a study that was similar. Now, we've been working, as soon as we heard that stat, which was a little bit less years ago, we were like, well, let's get a reusable, environmentally friendly economic solution into the region. So we started to work in the region, and we can meet the menstrual health needs of a girl for $1 a year. And so it's working. But what happened is you look and you find and we've talked to teachers, we've seen it happen in every country we work, that this is happening. Maybe not at 83%, but I can tell you it's happening in every country we work, where someone will say, I want to go to school. I don't want to miss. I don't want to have a rag that's going to bleed through. So I do have sex with some person, and then they buy me my menstrual products just in the same way that they might buy them food. Now, so what's happening is young pregnancies, sexually transmitted diseases. So it can be as extreme as that, or it can be you just don't go to school 3 to 5 days a month because you can't afford a pad. And here's what I found out last month. I spoke to girls in San Diego County, because now we have a new partnership with Blue Shield of California, Blue Shield Promise Health Plan, where we're piloting to see girls in this town are telling me, my mom can't afford pads. I don't go to school 3 to 5 days every month because I can't afford a pad. They're also saying, I use a tampon for 16 hours or longer, and it'll bleed through my clothes because they can't afford enough boxes of tampons, which is a recipe for toxic shock. So for me, it feels like, how can we allow girls not to have the dignity to have a basic need met, especially if you think there's a correlation between depression and not being able to, and worrying about bleeding through. There's anxiety, there's embarrassment, there's shame. There's so many things wrapped up to something so small. So it feels like we could end this if we really put our heads to it.
Right. So I remember working with the middle school districts in California back in about 2000, meeting with the superintendent in charge of middle schools. And he was telling me back then that the girls outperformed the boys in primary school. And then when they hit, 11, 12, 13 or so, there was a significant drop off. And then there was the teenage pregnancies and all that. Some of it was cultural. He didn't put it down to this, but just thinking back, this isn't just an Africa problem.
No.
This is a much bigger problem. So instead of just saying, well, those poor Africans, that's a problem,
That's
their
right.
problem, it's actually impacting poorer neighborhoods and situations in the US as well, right?
Around the world, Forbes just in May of this year, so last month, Forbes did an article, and they said that currently there are 3.5 billion menstruators, and that 40% of that cannot afford products. 40% of 3.5 billion. It is everywhere we look.
Amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
I was going to say, and one of the things that in our research, one of the things that really struck me is that the World Bank in 2018 said, when girls do not complete 12 years of education, it costs countries between $15 and $30 trillion in lost earnings. There is a direct correlation between women being educated and economic.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I was going to say to you. The economic cost of this is We think about the cost of people not being at work, for example,
Right.
setting the pandemic aside and whether people, all of that, but just the lost cost, the lost revenue, the cost. And so in the workplace, you try to do things that prevent that and so forth. But this seems to be a relatively simple solution for $1 a year, you're saying.
That's right. The $1 a year. And with $1 a year, we are providing a FDA. We've become our own manufacturing company now. So we manufacture in the USA, in California. We have a medical grade silicone menstrual cup, FDA registered. So it's the exact quality as the best cups in America. For $10, because we're a nonprofit, we don't spend money on packaging. I'll show you what it looks like.
Mm.
We do a biodegradable Ziploc bag.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it comes with an instructions for use in whatever language you need it in. And the cup itself is reusable. And then in the cup, each cup has to be stored in a cotton carrying bag. So we hire women in Africa in every community. Every cup in America is stored in a bag made by little girls coming out of the sex trade in Uganda. At Kampala, where there's 18,000 girls between the ages of 7 and 17. And then you store it in those bags and they're beautiful. And then there is, I'll show you an example. And so for $10, we will get you a cup to your country. So it includes the cup, the shipping, the bag. And then we also have someone who is a monitoring and evaluating specialist who we give you all the training through Zoom to be able to collect baseline data and end-line data after 3 months so that we can prove girls are actually using it. And that there's benefit. And now we started once a quarter, we're starting to publish our data in peer-reviewed medical journals, just so people, because there's still pushback. People still will say, we can't fund you because there's not enough data, which isn't true. There's so much published data showing it's safe. There's just a lot of misperceptions. And so we feel like we're going to keep working at it until people start to realize that we've served over 55,000 girls in Africa, but we have a wait list of 130,000 more. So
serving 55, wait list of 130,000 at about $10 per solution. Yeah. So, and it sounds like this is just would be, so if you got the 1.3 million to solve that problem, then it's just going to keep growing. I mean, the opportunities are going to keep growing.
That's right. Because then we would continue. But here's what would happen. I've been told that if we could get the 1.3 million, and then we would at that point be able to have served 200,000. And when we hit that number, it looks like we would be able to access there's a lot of money out there trying to solve period poverty and menstruation globally. It's just that for reasons that still baffle me, the large funding is not spending money on the cup. And I'm going to give you an example that's happening in America that, Brett, if I knew, I don't understand. So I think it's 20 states in this country have passed menstrual equity bills that allow for free tampons and free menstrual hygiene products in schools grades 6 through 12. State of California is one example. They've had this bill for a while, and then they amended the bill. And January of this year, they expanded it so that there's budget available for free menstrual hygiene products for grades 6 through 12 and all colleges and universities that are state. So they wrote the bill in every state, and they said these words: the definition of a menstrual hygiene product is a tampon or pad. So we brought it to their attention to try to say, well, you've excluded a reusable product like the cup that could save the environment and save money. And it was never amended. And yet we've got school districts in California who know they have low-income students who are not able to access products paid for by the government on nights, weekends, holidays, or summers. And yet they can't spend their budget on a cup that would do all of that and last 10 years and save the environment. And now there's a bill before Congress that would make this a policy for every state. And in that bill, it was also defined tampons and pads. And so we are working really hard to get to the lawmakers and to have meetings and to simply say, can we add the words but not limited to, and can we let school districts have choice? And I'm an optimist, and so I believe that it's going to work eventually, but I don't know when.
So this sounds like part of your problem is lobbying groups from the providers of these other products. I mean, just calling a spade, that this is the issue. It's saying like, we're going to provide nutrition from every kid, but it has to be brand X baby formula. And, you know, the big companies will be behind that, rather than really caring about solving the problems of the women involved.
So, I mean, I've been told you're never going to win, it's never going to work, but I also feel like it will, because when people are given choice and their voice, it's why we're trying to do an American campaign. We're trying to use social influencers. Right now, we use social influencers across Africa, people who are musicians or actors or just people that people know, and we have them on radio and TV locally, or in communities. We just did an event in Soweto at the box shop where we had two amazing CouldYou Cup ambassadors, Gigi Lemin and Brian Temba, come, and they talk about the issue. They introduce the cup, they perform, people love them, they open doors, they come to townships, and they're beginning to do just get the word out. We work with JC2Q in Mozambique. Now we're going to start to work with them. You're going to start seeing billboards of CouldYou Cup in South Africa, like they are in Mozambique. So eventually we feel like if we can have every country we work in, which we're trying very hard to have people of influence share the message, we're going to do the same in America, so that eventually the people who are making decisions about how they spend money might realize that the people are asking for. And here's the truth. Not everyone's going to want the cup. That's okay. But allow, if 10% of them chose it, then those 10% didn't have to worry about buying a product for 10 years.
Yeah, right. Sounds like you need to get hold of some women senators, Congress people, and so on.
We are trying to get a meeting with Grace Meng out of New York. So she's the one that put before Congress a menstrual equity that would affect every state in the country. And we are a big believer that Grace would want a partner in this way. And so we're hopeful that we'll meet with her in the next few months and that she would be an advocate. So we shall see.
Yeah. Sounds like you need 1,000 young women posting little videos on her Facebook site. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So you've linked those two issues. So the one giant has led you to another one, led you from one country to many countries, a broad, multi-billion person problem around the world. And so, Christine, I want to chat to you a little bit about, where do you get your courage from to be tackling these giants? I mean, you're a fighter, you've been after these things and doing it cheerfully. What inspires you?
It is twofold. It is my faith. I feel like if I wake up incredibly discouraged, and I think this is impossible, it's never going to work, we're never going to get the money, no one's ever going to listen to us, I do two things. One, I personally spend time with God and get encouraged that it's not, all I have to do is the best I can. I think I'm in the right place, fighting the right battle. And then all I have to do is remember 55,000 is not a random number. These are lives forever changed. These are little girls in displacement camps in Mozambique who lost their mother and father in a cyclone and their house and everything else, and got infected, went to Central Hospital and was given a menstrual cup, and is now never going to have to worry about having an unsanitary product. It's girls not having, I mean, I look at the individual and I think I can keep going, because if all I want to impact millions, but even if all I impact is tens of thousands or one, I want to believe that one life matters. Now, I really do want to impact millions. I really, really want breakthrough, and I'm going to keep going until I get it. But I feel like it's a little bit of feeling as if God's saying, I'll open some doors, I'll do the work for you. And then remembering each one of these lives that we get the gift of knowing that we got to do something good for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. That's great. Yeah, it's so important to learn to encourage oneself, and that's fantastic. Yeah, so it's good to see that, and the ripple effect from those 55,000 to their families, to children, to communities is huge. That's amazing. Great. So let's go back to 2012. We met each other at a conference down in Long Beach, and you came up to our place shortly afterwards. It was our first executive intensive that we held. We had, I think, about 10 people from different parts of the world. Tell us a little bit about, firstly, what the experience was like and whether anything stuck with you. This is 10 years later, I'm catching you, and if it's made any difference in your life or not.
So it definitely, it has. And I would say it came at a time when I felt really isolated and I did not have community around me. And I'm not running a Christian organization. And so that means I'm really careful about not imposing an agenda, but I really needed to be in a room with people who were like-minded, who shared similar faith, who could encourage each other to help me determine, am I crazy? Because sometimes if you're running an organization and you're not getting the kind of breakthrough you want, you start to think, maybe it is me, or maybe the organization's life is over, or maybe I should. And for me, I felt like I got around people who I trusted, and I don't trust people easily. So it was helpful to be in a room of people that were really smart, but really had great faith and really kind and generous. And to see that group of people come together, strangers leaving friends, encouraging each other, I think they gave me this like new breath of hope. And something, I mean, you and Lynn in particular, because I had been on my own journey where I had just not had, my parents are gone. I had not had anyone literally take on some blessing of like, you guys prayed this prayer over me. You did this blessing that was, it changed me. It felt like I had someone looking on and saying, well done, which I had not had before.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, well, that was our privilege. Yeah. I love that psalm, the verse in the Psalms that God sets the lonely in families. Now, you're a pioneer out there. It's not like you're a bleeding heart specialist where you need a lot of coddling. I mean, people will hear from us that that there's some good reason you started in New York. I mean, you had a lot of grit having done what you've done already, but it is important for us to be in a community of like-minded water walkers, if you like, people who are willing to go in there. So yeah, that's lovely, Christine. Yeah, wonderful. And were there practical tools that helped you at all in thinking through CouldYou? Can you remember that far back?
I think one of them had to do with strategy. I think I remember the lemon. I don't remember all the details, but I remember looking at ways that I had to think more strategically.
Yeah.
And I also was able to connect dots through networking. And here's what's interesting. So all these years later, I needed someone trustworthy in Nigeria, just because we've been asked to go to Nigeria and I don't know Nigeria. Yeah. And I asked you to connect us to someone in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And what that one act did is we feel like there is someone who is helping us navigate as we are now in the process of our cup being FDA registered there. We're going to be doing sale and donations. So every time something comes up where I am like, am I being overcharged, or does this make sense? I have a trusted person who I've never met in person, but he's been part of the REAP community, who literally is, we want to pay fair wage, but we don't want to be taken advantage of. And so I would say I've now been able to connect with reap people that I've never met in South Africa, in Nigeria, and we'll continue to do that. So I'd say, yes, it is remembering. And that's also, I think, one of the things that the training had to do with understanding what is your local resource of it anyway. So understanding the mapping of what is your community mapping, because it's extraordinary. And it might look different than what the books say, but to be able to understand and map the community, identify the resources, and then partner in strategic ways has been, I think, part of our success, because the only reason we don't raise, it's not like we have a huge budget. And the reason we can serve a lot of people and go to scale is because we did that. We looked at who are the great organizations on the ground, what are the resources that are already there, and we simply offered them an add-on to what they do. So now I don't have to hire staff and nurses in every country. What I say are, who are the best 75 organizations doing what is involved in young women? And then they hear about us, they reach out to us, we vet them, we enter into a partnership where they just do what they do, and all they do is add our cup into their work. We give them some training, some oversight, and a few resources, but it is why we are able to scale, because we are able to identify the right community partnerships. And I think that was a lesson out of
fantastic. So now this thing goes a bit further, because you then introduced us to a company called Liveful down the road here in Georgia, who are operating in different parts of the world. And you are partnering with them. I know this isn't a full thrust initiative for you, because you're still going through approval processes, and they're going through some FDA approval processes in the US. But in some countries, they're up and running and approved. What's their product, and how are you hoping to add that as another string in your bow?
So we definitely, if you remember the mission being to curate, prove, and scale solutions to poverty, ending period poverty by 2040, we believe we're now in the scale phase, and we think we can end it in the right partnerships. Now, another one that's in the phase of prove is Liveful is a for-profit company doing extraordinary work in repellent, right? And so it was started by a Nigerian gentleman who's amazing, Hogan. And so even though it's a for-profit company, they have a real heart to serve as many people as possible. They're men of faith, and they have, the way I met them, they were coming to a conference that was a very large malaria conference. And one of my friends from Mozambique is a representative over the continent for malaria. And an incredible person out of Mozambique. And so they wanted to meet him and start some conversations. And I didn't know them, but I was introduced to them by a board member. And so once I got to meet them and I tried the repellent myself, I thought, okay, this thing works. And if you've traveled to places in the bush, and you're especially in places where there's still water, there's too many mosquitoes. You have to go get DEET or something that's uncomfortable. And so when I tried their repellent, yes, I introduced them to my friends, but then every time I would travel and I'd be meeting with ministers of health about the cup, I would literally have sachets of repellent with me, and I would just use it and I'd show it to them. They would use it. They'd call me and say, "Where'd you get this? Like, it works. We're not getting bit." And so I started realizing that if we can keep people from getting bit, you can end malaria, you can end mosquito-borne diseases. And then I think what ends up happening, I'm someone who cares so deeply about justice. Like, I just want a just system.
Right.
So when I realized that there are only two protections that the World Health Organization has deemed appropriate to protect communities, it is indoor residual spraying and pesticide bed nets. Those are good things. However, they're not the only things.
Yeah.
It's a $12 billion a year industry to protect people from malaria, to fight malaria. And yet, if you look at Africa, anyone who's gone there knows that people are spending the least amount of time in their particular home. The
Right.
most amount of time they're farming, they're working, they're cooking outside. So to not be able to have a protection that actually protects them when they're outside of their home, that is also safe and natural, doesn't make sense to me. And so I started to feel this level of, wait a second, like, I know, how can we not be a part of proving that so I ended up meeting some amazing people in Uganda, and they were deeply connected to Ugandan government and the World Health, and they tried the repellent, and they believe that this is a game changer. They think it is a world disruptor. And so it turns out that the World Health acknowledges that repellents are a personal protection, but not a community protection. Now, bed nets are both personal and community.
Yeah.
So countries all have budgets to fight malaria, but right now they can't really spend that money on repellent. So when I spoke to our friends in Uganda, they had said that the way you could address this would be to do 2 independent scientific peer-reviewed journal studies on the efficacy, because LIFL has done a wonderful job. They've got plenty of testing from Cage, London School, all over the world, that we know the product is safe. We know it works. We know it's safe for children under 2 or over 2, I guess. And so what we tried to do is they white label it. And so CouldYou has trademarked, we've trademarked Max Repellent, maximum strength. And we have a malaria education program that we've created, as well as our first entrepreneur is in Ghana. And what he did is we raised the money through partnerships that started out with LIFL. And we've proven that companies are able to protect their employees and get better productivity when their employees are not home with malaria or not bothered by getting rid of mosquitoes. Kofi has done such a good job that he's also received some funding through a partnership with the World Bank, and they're protecting farmers in partnership with AgriInvest, because again, if farmers are not worrying about being bit all the time, their crop input will eventually increase. Yeah. And then we just got IRB approval in Uganda recently, and we are beginning the first trial with them with Macquarie University and the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation that will prove over the next 7 months the protection of people and the benefits of having this very safe product on you. And our hope is that another trial will happen. I got a letter of intent for a similar trial in Ghana with Merck Pharmaceutical, but there hasn't been a whole lot of movement in the last few years with Merck. And so we are going to wait and see what happens in Uganda, be hopeful for the Merck one in Ghana. And if not, we'll raise the money to do a second trial in either South Africa or Mozambique. And then when we have 2 independent studies that prove the benefits of it, then we'll be able to take it to the World Bank, obviously in partnership with LIFL and friends that I have. And we will be asking that they are able to allow government budgets to protect their people. And the reality is this: a government can do what the government wants. So if the government if Uganda, for instance, sees that it protects their people, they could allocate some of their budget for repellent. And then we can see a sustainable business so it not only protects their people, but then it will be local entrepreneurs in Uganda who would be the ones that would be packaging the repellent. And currently our main partner in Uganda is Bishop Lawari, and it's a network of 51,000 churches. So it would be the local church that would benefit by creating jobs and then also being able to protect their own people. So to me, we're not there yet. Yeah. It is hopeful. It is hopeful.
It is hopeful. And a common thread that you've seen is a root cause issue that is then causing social and economic knock-ons. And there's practical financial benefits to solving these problems, but you have to get over some of the entrenched thinking around there's only one way to solve a problem. And also the thinking that says, yeah, the problem that comes out of the US or out of Europe is the best answer.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas often, as you talk about having the humility to look at other solutions is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Christine, so what's your one wish for the coming year in terms of something that's on your heart? You said, okay, man, if this is the one area that I'd like to see a forward leap in, and then how can people find you? I mentioned CouldYou.org. Is that the best place for people to
Yes.
go?
CouldYou.org.
Great.
So my hope for this year, I believe that if this is the year that we get the $1 million, if we raise the $1 million, I believe it will open the doors for us to actually scale, because it's not just part of that million is going towards Ukrainian refugees, getting cups inside Poland as well as in Ukraine, in hospitals. And so here's my hope. My hope is that as it's going to be a domino, as soon as we have enough momentum, which I think we're about to have a tipping point, I think we will have served, then we'll close out the year, we'll have served 200,000 people. And that will put us in the running to be able to apply for the $10 million grants that are out there serving this need anyway. So that's what I think is, that's my hope.
So that's a leveraged ask in a sense, because it'll give you legitimacy, your studies, your track record, which would then put you in the bigger leagues to serve more people. Yeah, fantastic.
One last thing I want to say, though, is we recently got a letter from the Ministry of Education in Sofala in Mozambique stating that our cup and our program is, in their words, retaining their girls in school. To me, that's a big win. Now, I know it feels like that is the domino, at least to say, here is a government acknowledging that, hey, this is working. So if we can have that, and then the resources to continue to prove the same thing in the other countries, I think that's why we will be able to end period poverty by 2040. So that's my hope.
Fantastic. Excellent. Great.
Well, thank you.
Christine, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time today. Greatly appreciated. Thanks for sharing your story. God bless you with what you're doing.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah, and look forward to hearing of the progress as it goes, and glad to have been connected those 10 years ago and just seeing the amazing work that you continue to do. So God bless you.
Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.